On our way out of Paris, we had an automobile accident, which is probably fitting. We'd had an unfortunate road incident earlier in our weeks in Paris. We had tried to get a taxi, and a French woman had barged in and stolen the taxi from my father, who was holding the door open for my mother and us. She barged in, and my father protested, and she spit in his face. Which at that point pretty much summed up how he felt about France and Paris. But the idea was we were going to go home. We were going to get on a ship called the Leonardo da Vinci and sail from Genoa, Italy, back through the Mediterranean and to New York in a 10-day, what amounted to a cruise. And all we had to do was get from Paris to Genoa in about 10 days. Easier said than done. Paris had shown that we were not as fluent in French as we all thought well, Susie and I thought we were. First hint probably came way back in Cherbourg on the first night in Brittany, when my mother, who had been a major in French, Portuguese, and Spanish, said to the woman who carried our bags up in the elevator, "Très heavy, n'est-ce pas?" We had all struggled a bit with the language barrier, and now we are outside of Paris where hardly anybody speaks English. But what we did was we traveled down the Loire River Valley, hitting the great chateaus along the way. And we were in the car that had just demolished a Citroën Deux Chevaux on the Champs-Élysées. That being the tiniest, most ridiculous car ever made outside of, the Eastern Bloc. And actually, our only moment of civil graciousness in Paris was the guy that we ran into, who was holding his broken rear bumper in his hand and saying he loved Americans. And so that's how we took our actual departure. So we went to Amboise, where my sister and I both developed severe leg problems. We'd never gotten over from climbing all the towers to the top of the Tower of Amboise. We went to Chenonceau, which might be the most beautiful place anybody's ever been. This long causeway to this incredible marble chateau with columns and rooms that just astound. It's like, oh my God. Now we understand why the French don't like anybody else in the world. Because they obviously have it all. And we also stopped in places that were not chateaus. We stopped in a place that billed itself as the home of nougat candy, where everything, in fact, was actually named nougat. Nougat bar, nougat cafe, nougat this, except for the hotel. My wife finds this story particularly appealing because it proves what a sap I am. We stopped and stayed the night at the Diane de Poitiers Hotel, which was small and whitewashed and very picturesque. It's very French. It's that was a small, quaint French town. and the way that only the French can do it, meaning with like tons of bed bugs. We all slept on like 1 inch mattresses. My sister and I shared a room, and my parents shared a room, of course. And we woke up the next morning all scratching vigorously. It was terrible. I didn't think we even bought any nougat candy. I mean, our next stop was supposed to be Avignon, and we were like on a schedule. So we took the obligatory croissant, and I can tell you that, like, not every croissant in France is created equal. Can I just like leave it at that? So we're on the road, and we are headed to Avignon, and I reach into my pocket, and I realize that I have this incredibly heavy room key set thing in my pocket. It's like a large star with a number of the room on it, and then there's like this key is like a skeleton key for every horror movie you've ever seen. It's like it's that big. It's like, and I forgot that I had it, and I was supposed to turn it in. It's like, oh my god. And so we're like driving on and on toward Avignon, and I'm like feeling more and more awful. It's like this key. It's like, oh my god, I've got this key, and I should have turned it in, right? And I didn't. And finally, despite my notorious powers for an impassive and implacable, unbeatable face, everybody in the car turned and looked at me and said, "What is wrong with you?" So I said, "Okay." At which, being 10 years old, I braved up and I dissolved in tears. And I explained that I had absconded with the key from our room at the Diane de Poitiers Hotel. Whereupon my father pulled the car over to the side of the road and looked back over the driver's seat back and stared at me and said, "You did what?" And I said, I have, and I held up the key. Star first, right? So, and the key dangling below. And he said, "Well," he said, "all I can say is," and he held up his own key, star first, dangling. He said, "I did too." It's okay. So that became a thing that we had as a memento of France, maybe more than anything else. My dad had this mug, crystal mug, and he had both keys in it in his bar. Our memory of the thing that made us itch in France. So we continued on through the south of France. We saw, I know, you don't want to hear about all the chateaus. It's like we saw them, and they're beautiful. And the other thing we saw, apart from the chateaus, was the cathedral at Chartres, which for me probably was the highlight. You can't, there's no way really to describe what this is. It's like, it is a cathedral that took more than 200 years to build, and the design changed as they built it. So you've got two towers, and they're both completely different. It's like, who would do that but the French? Well, we like this tower better. Okay, so fine. And you're thinking, okay, it might be a little bit like odd outside. It's beautiful, but it's like odd, right? And you go inside, and there are these windows, stained glass windows that really are like eyes of God. I mean, they are so incredibly complex and beautiful, and you don't know where to look. The sun seems to be coming in from every direction, and everything inside is like, oh my God, God is here. Then you pile into the car and you like head down the road again because you got to get to here. You got to get to Genoa. I was like, okay. So we've got to get to Genoa, and then what we have to do in order to get to Genoa, we have to get out of France, which leads us to a rite of passage in my own life. It is called the Grand Corniche.